Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, at long last, fellow Sarc Fighter Royce Robertson has taken on his fundraising bike ride.
It was 196 miles over the course of 3 days.
But the weather was not his friend.
Actually, to the east in suburban Syracuse, there was a tornado. So we were on the western edge of that.
It's all coming up on the award-winning FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter Podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 96 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, John Carlin. Want to let you know that Kinevant Sciences is researching a potential new drug for sarcoidosis called namilumab, which inhibits one of the key proteins believed responsible for granuloma formation and persistence in sarcoidosis. Listen to episode 69 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, where Kinevant CEO Bill Gearhart and their Director of Patient Advocacy, Rainey Rogers, discuss the status of namilumab and how you, as a sarcoidosis patient, can participate in their Phase 2 clinical trial. And that trial is called Resolve Lung. And there's a link in the show notes if you'd like more information. Maybe you can participate in the trial and perhaps find that namilumab really helps you out and also help move the needle as we try to find cures for sarcoidosis. All right. Notice that I added award-winning in the introduction today because it is. I've been meaning to say this because earlier this year, as I've told you, the podcast received that Crystal Award from the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research at a big gala in Washington, D.C., and I got to tell you, I can still feel the glow from that evening. It was such a fun event, and it was just really cool to see some fellow Sarc patients there and so many researchers and other people involved in trying to advance the cause for sarcoidosis. And so I don't want to let the memory of that evening lapse. But more than that, I just really appreciate the recognition that all of us have received, because this podcast is really about all of you, those of you who have shared your stories or your research here and basically opened up your lives to how sarcoidosis has impacted you if you've been on the patient side, and if you're on the research side or the treatment side, just thanking you and recognizing you for deciding that sarcoidosis is what you want to work on. Because we know we need more of that. And so anyway, I've been meaning to call it the award-winning podcast since we won the award, and I just had kind of forgotten to say it. So from now on, somewhere in that intro, I'm going to say welcome to the award-winning FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, and that's what it's all about. You know, it's nice to have won the award, but I also, I want to honor the outstanding decision-making process that FSR went through among all the worthy people out there to choose this podcast as an honoree, because it also recognizes all of you who have contributed. Okay, I've talked about that too much, but again, thank you to everyone involved with that, and let's realize that when I say award-winning podcast, it's really about all of you guys. All right. So listen, in the last episode, I riffed a little bit about people who've been struck by lightning have formed support groups because their lives have been so altered after being hit by lightning, and then nobody understands. They don't know anybody else who's been struck by lightning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People look at them and they look fine, but they have all of these problems in their bodies because they've been hit by lightning, but nobody knows that. And at that time, I suggested that all of us have been struck by something that came from out of left field and sort of does the same thing. And one day you're fine, the next you have this chronic disease that messes up your life. And I wondered out loud on the last one, okay, so what's more common, being struck by lightning or being struck by sarcoidosis. And I just did a quick Google search, and it turns out that 28 people die each year from lightning strikes in the U.S., and about 300 people are hit by lightning. So if we use the common number for Sarc patients, there's 200,000 people in the United States have sarcoidosis. So unfortunately, it looks like being struck by lightning is more uncommon than being, quote unquote, struck by sarcoidosis. So lightning is rarer, but the results are often the same, especially with lightning strikes. You have a lot of neurological damage because your body basically works through electrical fields, and that's what lightning is all about. So sometimes lightning rewires people. But that's, in my case, I have neurological damage from sarcoidosis. Anyway, Sarc is more common than lightning strikes, and the results are the same, but just a bit of unfinished business there, something that was sticking with me that I didn't have time to research before I just started hypothesizing in the last podcast. Also, I want to let you know there's a new report out that's very interesting that says methotrexate, which is a very common drug in treating sarcoidosis, may not be as effective as we thought as an alternative to prednisone in cardiac sarcoidosis patients. So the organization Sarcoidosis News is reporting that more study is needed, but there's an interesting article according to a small study in Japan. This is done by Steve Bryson, PhD. I'm just going to read you the first couple of paragraphs of this article, but it says, most cardiac patients respond to 6 months of first-line treatment with prednisone and show reduced active inflammation in the heart, according to a small study in Japan. Cardiovascular events were less common among responders relative to those who responded poorly, further confirming the first-line prednisone's effectiveness with the condition. And among poor responders, adding methotrexate to low-dose prednisone resulted in similar outcomes as a second round of prednisone, and none of the approaches led to significant reductions in heart inflammation. These findings stand in contrast to the general idea that methotrexate is an alternative to prednisone for poor responders, and it calls for larger studies to assess the therapy's efficacy in those patients. So the story goes on in much more detail, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's interesting. And remember, even learning that something may not work is progress. So if the doctors are treating heart patients with low-dose prednisone and methotrexate, it's good to know that there's a study out there that says, well, you know what, that may not be as effective as we thought it was, because you don't want to be receiving something that potentially doesn't work, right? So the study's out there, and it's essentially saying that prednisone is effective. Adding methotrexate in low-dose prednisone is not as effective, and this is a very preliminary finding. It's a small study, but I try to keep my eye out for this type of stuff and then put it out in front of you so that you can do further research if you're interested in it, or just take what I just said and know that there's something going on with prednisone and that there's a study that found that. So that is what it is, and there will be a link in the show notes. Okay, coming up, poor Royce and his bike ride. First, it's delayed by that forest fire smoke from the fires up in Canada, and then it turns out he pedals off into a rainstorm.
And so, we knew we were going to get drenched because we had about 25 miles to go.
Royce's fundraising ride is next on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter Podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. Joining me once again is Royce Robertson, just back from his bicycle adventure and FSR fundraiser. Royce, thanks for joining me again.
It's great to be here, John. Great to be back, and looking forward to telling people about our exciting and wet adventure.
Oh, and wet. So
really wet.
Okay, so it was already kind of epic, and then it got even more epic. So let's just set the table in case people haven't listened to the earlier podcast. You were going from where to where?
Buffalo, New York to Syracuse, New York.
And you're doing that along basically a bicycle path that's called the Empire Trail?
Yes, it's a combination of the Erie Canal and the historic Erie Canal, and then also added trails that have been built in and around certain towns, between towns, wherever the canal doesn't exist.
Okay, gotcha. And it's that's a long way, though. People think of New York, and they usually the first thing they think of is New York City. They don't realize that it's a huge state. But so, how many miles is it from Buffalo to your endpoint here, Syracuse?
It was 196 miles over the course of 3 days, and that includes kind of our off the trail parts where we had to get out to a hotel or get to a bed and breakfast or anything like that. I just forgot to turn off Strava.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Those are all miles in your legs. That's all that matters. So, so you would ride, you'd get off the trail, and then it might be 3 or 4 miles, maybe, hopefully less, to the hotel, and then back to the trail the next morning, and then resume. Yep. Okay, so and you had to delay this first of all because of the smoke from the Canadian wildfires.
Yes, yeah, the Western New York, Central New York was getting well over 150 in terms of the AQI. And frankly, that weekend, as much as I wanted to do it, and as much as I was prepared to, my eyes were burning, my lungs hurt when I was breathing, and frankly, for someone who's immune compromised and has sarcoidosis, that it was just a foolish decision to continue. So my co-rider Jerry, called me and gave me the reality check and said, Royce, I know you're an intrepid guy, but we've got to make a logical decision here. And so we chose to cancel it at that time and reschedule for August the 6th to the 9th.
Okay. So you actually did the ride. And then you mentioned the rain, so I'm just going to jump right in. So it was a wet ride. What kind of wet? What happened?
Sure. So actually, I mean, it wasn't all wet. It was actually a really nice range of thank God it didn't snow. Let's put it that way. But it was a full range of summer weather. Let's put it that way. We started out in Buffalo early in the morning on Monday the 7th. It was cool. It was breezy, and by the time we got out past Tonawanda and in kind of the straightaways out of the kind of the suburban Buffalo area, sun came out. It was warm, crack a sweat. It was really nice, little breezy, and actually nice tail breeze. So it was, we're moving along, having a great day. Actually got to a point where I thought, oh, I better get some sunscreen on, because up until that point it was all cloudy. And we got in through like Lockport, Middleport. We're about halfway to our destination for that day of Brockport, and we had lunch, left Middleport, and as we got to a straightaway, I looked to the south, and the blue sky that was over me with some big puffy cotton ball clouds, it was just black to the south. I mean, it was just this wall of black clouds heading north to us. And Jerry stopped. We would usually stop if he got ahead of me. We'd stop under bridges and agree that we would just catch up at a bridge. And so he stopped at the next bridge, and I was like, hey, did you see what's coming our way? And he's not a real heavy technologically savvy guy. So he's like, check the radar. And I just saw a big band of yellow, orange, red to our south. And it said that it was moving north at about 25 miles an hour. And so, we knew we were going to get drenched because we had about 25 miles to go. And so somewhere in there, it started to just kind of drizzle a little bit, and we got to a bridge and said, well, let's just wait here. And about 45 minutes later, we passed through a pretty a pretty substantial downpour passed through. Actually, to the east in suburban Syracuse, there was a tornado. So we were on the western edge of that front that actually created a tornado, elsewhere. So we endured that rain, and then once it died down enough, we started taking off again. And so we were in a little bit of drizzle, and then probably about 10 miles from Brockport, heavy torrential downpour. And we decided not to stop.
You were just stuck in it then.
We were at that point, we were like, we're wet. We want to be done. And we put in 76 miles that day. So we were just cranking along in the rain, and, and it was a lot slower going because when it's packed gravel, but once it gets soaked, you're sinking in. And
mud,
and so you're riding through kind of a firm mud, for about, I think we probably did about 15 miles total in that slop, and then got to Brockport and had to ride up to our hotel. I swear I took my shoes off. I thought I had like a half an inch of water in the bottom of my shoes. The ladies, big shout out to the ladies at the Hampton Inn in Brockport, New York, because they basically said, clean yourself off outside before you come in. And they were good. They kind of looked at us funny, like, why would you ride in all of that crap?
Right. But, so you didn't have raincoats or anything like that with you?
We did. I didn't go with rain pants because I just felt like that's a lot of burden. And plus that with the sympathectomy that I've had, the sympathetic denervation, I don't sweat from the chest up.
That's right.
But the same amount of sweat comes out, south of my chest, and so those things, they would just get soaked on the inside if I wore leggings, or rain pants. So we wore rain jackets, and then left the legs exposed. And I think actually the breeze really helped to keep me a little bit cooler. And it was good. It was a lot of cleaning on that first night, and then we agreed that, every night we might kind of, have snacks and smaller meals along the way. We were going to feast every night. So I had a great cheeseburger on Monday night, some really good shoestring French fries, and I had a decent night's sleep. But my legs just wouldn't shut up. They were just tingling all night long.
Yep. I know that feeling for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So, well, I just wanted to ask you, now you are riding were you riding a regular bike or a mountain bike? Or did you decide to get an e-bike?
I ride a Cannondale e-bike.
Okay.
And it has about 37 miles of range on it. And so I didn't use it all the time. I really only used it when I had to, if there were uphill inclines, or if I needed to stay one step ahead of the rain. I didn't use it a whole lot, but I also did check my heart rate on occasion, and even though it's, my heart rate is kind of medically altered, metoprolol, that kind of thing. I rarely got into a heart rate range that would be considered, troublesome for me. I was mostly, in the 100 to 130 range. So it was good. It was good.
Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't straining myself. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, that's great. Your doctors had told you that you had to, if you were going to do this, that you had to keep your heart rate down and not push yourself too awfully hard, right?
Yep. Yeah. Keep basically, there's a lot of hills in central New York, and many times, I know that, a steep hill on the backside of the Finger Lakes, you could easily get you up into the 160, 170, 180, BPM range. And I really shouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So, and all this is a fundraiser for sarcoidosis. So just to make sure that listeners know, we're not, because people know me talking about bicycles, I'll go on all day, but
Yep.
but all of this is a fundraiser, and I want people to know that if they donated to your cause, you are out there doing the work. All they had to do was strike the check or swipe the credit card. So, if you're out there doing all this in the rain and the mud, come on, people, this is all for a good cause.
Yeah.
So your legs tingled all night and you still had to get up and ride again the next day. How'd that go?
Yeah, it was all right, actually. Once you get moving, you get loosened up, everything's good. The problem with day 2, which was Brockport, New York to Newark, New York, about 57 miles, was that it was a steady drizzle all day long.
Really?
Yep. And it was, it was a little cooler, so you had to work a little harder to stay warm. And then yeah, it was kind of an I guess an uneventful day, except for the rain. We didn't stop a lot to sightsee. There's some beautiful little towns in the suburbs of Rochester, like Fairport is a beautiful spot, and those towns take such pride in being on the Erie Canal, and the historical relevance of it, and the economic relevance of it. And so pretty places. Pittsford, stopped at a little bike shop there to get some, we needed new CO2 cartridges. We wanted to make sure we had a flat along the way, and wanted to get it,
those, the people use those to inflate their tires, just for listeners that are not bike savvy. So and we need to replace a tube, that kind of thing. And the folks were super friendly, and like, where are you riding from, where are you riding to, do you need anything from us, and any advice on anything there. Everybody was, they were very in tune with the kind of the culture around people that ride the Empire Trail. Well, that's really cool. So you did I guess after the first day where you're doing 70 plus miles, just doing 50 some odd miles felt like an easy day, right?
Legs were fine, but some good saddle sores started to build in, and I just hadn't trained that part of my body as much as I should have. But it was a little sore. But we had a nice bed and breakfast in Newark. And they had comfortable beds and a beautiful big clawfoot tub, and so you could just sit and soak away your troubles at the end of the day. And we went out and had a good dinner, and then just relaxed and got up on day 3. Day 3 from Newark, New York to Syracuse was actually the best weather out of all the days. It was sunny, little cotton ball clouds, nothing too cloudy, minimal breeze. Got into the upper 70s, low 80s by the end of the day. All in all, most beautiful of the days. The only difference is those were some of those were sections of the trail that I had already been on, so it was covered territory. But the weather was beautiful. It was a great way to end. It was I think 61 or 63 miles that day, I can't remember, and we rolled into Syracuse and went to the famous dinosaur barbecue and had some ribs and slaw, which is usually my favorite way to finish off a good ride.
So the famous dinosaur barbecue, I've never heard of the famous dinosaur barbecue.
Well, I get famous for Central New Yorkers.
Okay, gotcha. So, all right. I love a good barbecue place, though. Absolutely.
Good. Well, you've gone to Syracuse. We'll bring you to Dinosaur.
That's great. All right. So that was the end of the trip, right? Or was that?
Yep. That was it. That was it.
And then how did you get back to where you started? Did you have a vehicle parked there, or somebody come pick you up? Or
no, I'm from Syracuse, so we actually back up even further. Strangely enough, I refuse to admit that it might be an omen, but Jerry and I were supposed to get on a westbound Amtrak on Sunday, August the 6th, and there was a derailment just west of Albany, New York, and which stopped all train service through New York for about 3 or 4 days. So I got a text message on Sunday morning that said, "Oh, by the way, your train is canceled." And so we had to go to Plan B, which was a one-way car rental from Syracuse to Buffalo. So we rented a car, drove to Buffalo, left the car in Buffalo, and then rode the bikes back to Syracuse. And so grateful for my family, my wife and daughter. They met us at Dinosaur for a little celebration, and then packed up the car, and they took us home. I live about 15, 20 miles south of Syracuse.
Okay, that's right. I forgot that's where you were.
Yeah.
And so your plan then would be to do an additional fundraiser next year and to start in Syracuse and just keep on heading east until eventually you traverse all of New York State, right?
Yep, there's 750 miles in the Empire Trail. We've kind of, most people break it down into 4 sections, that Buffalo to Syracuse, Syracuse to Albany, Albany to Manhattan, and then the Canadian border or Plattsburgh, south to Albany. And so the goal is to do all of those, cover the 750 miles here in New York, and then branch out. I went and did a little segment of the C&O Trail in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, in and around that area this summer, and I'm in love with it.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the Erie Canal Trail, but it seems to have a lot more tree cover. The river is beautiful. And there's a little more, I think, a little bit more geologic significance. For the most part, you don't see a lot of exposed rock in along the Erie Canal, but the section that I rode in West Virginia was beautiful. I mean, and so I think after we finish New York, we're going to head down and probably start planning something combination of the Allegheny Trail and the C&O and go Pittsburgh to DC.
Yeah. A lot of people who live around where I do have done that, and I have not. I haven't ridden any of it, and so that's also a bucket list for me as well. So. And I'm really hoping we can join forces and make this even bigger. And several other people have reached out to me. They've heard about us talking about this on the podcast, and people in the sarcoidosis space are wanting to participate. So I hope we can get a whole group together and do one of these rides, hopefully start next summer, and then just keep it rolling.
Yeah. When I was on the C&O, it was early in the morning. It was going to be 90 or so that day, and I thought I want to get this ride done early so that I don't fry. And I ran into a few groups that were camping along the trail as they were riding, and I thought to myself, I'm not totally sure I can do that, but I kind of like a bed. But big shout out to them, because that's a lot to do all of that riding and then, bed down every night on the ground. And then to carry all that stuff too. That was one of the big, bike. That was one of the biggest things I think I learned during this trip was being really very discerning about what you need and don't need. And learning how to pack it in a way that it's accessible and dry, and that it works for you. That you can't take everything, so you've got to figure out how to take what you have. Right.
So let's talk about your fundraising. That went pretty well, didn't it?
It did. The first phase up to the ride, we raised about $2,250.
Okay.
And that was from, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 16 to 18 donors, something in that neighborhood. Certainly appreciate everything that those individuals committed. Jerry reached out to his family, and I reached out to mine, and had some friends of friends who sent messages to friends of theirs. And it was, I think, a very good kind of social network, good use of social networks. And then, so we started the ride with that idea that, $2,250, that's great. And then when I finished, I got home, we got home on Sunday, and then Monday in the mail, I had received a check for $5,000 from someone that I know who chose to be an anonymous donor. And in speaking to that person, they said, use it however you need it, and just appreciate everything that you're doing. So that it just seemed to put it into a whole new level of meaning for me to say that someone cared about what we were doing that much to make that significant of a donation.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's when you're reaching somebody and touching somebody with your situation and your effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it kind of set the bar a little higher for next summer. And yeah, but I think it's a good challenge. I'm working with the folks at FSR right now to figure out how and when we want to make some contributions to families, and start to figure out kind of what are the criteria, what are the kind of the ground rules for helping. Remember, my purpose, really, my why is to support families that have to travel for treatment, and supporting their needs beyond what their insurance may or may not cover,
Right.
gas, hotel rooms, food, those kind of things. And how do we help people who may not have, I don't mean to say anything negative about the medical community, but sarcoidosis is a mystery to some, and getting proper treatment in the right places is important.
Absolutely. And I've preached that a lot of the folks who contact me through the podcast will say they live in some remote area, or they just happen to live in a populated area that doesn't have a nearby center where there may be doctors who quote unquote treat sarcoidosis, but it's not like going to a sarcoidosis clinic where they're seeing Sarc patients every day, all the time.
Yep.
They understand the nuances of what's going on with people. They've seen it before. They know how to react. They know if it's a problem, or they can tell somebody, that's just sarcoidosis, but at least they know because they see it all the time.
Yep.
As opposed to just following the playbook, which, starts with prednisone, then goes to methotrexate. And, you can look that up on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. Frankly,
it's having eyes on the patient, and because I can just tell the difference between the doctors that I have who are in a clinic in Cleveland, as opposed to other doctors who, I was maybe one of 3 or 4 patients that had sarcoidosis that they had worked with, and they weren't terrible doctors. They just don't do it every day.
Yep. Yeah. No, that is one of the things that I noticed the most about being treated at Johns Hopkins, is that there is a team, an interprofessional team down there that has expertise in different organs, but they all care about sarcoidosis, whether it's a pulmonologist or a cardiologist or, an endocrinologist. They all know why I'm there. And the reason that I'm there is the reason that they are there.
That's
and
right.
And that is a very reassuring concept for someone who is, not to sound cliche or hyperbolic, that they're in a fight for their life.
That's right. And usually anybody with sarcoidosis has multiple doctors in multiple disciplines, because who knows what organs are affected, and it just gets very complicated very fast. So what are you thinking about for next year? Do you have a month in mind for next year?
I think, if we can pull it off, I'd like to do 2 next summer. I'm thinking big, but or bigger. I'd like to possibly in June do Syracuse to Albany, and then possibly in July and or early August do Albany to Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah. If I could pull them off both in June, I might, but that also depends on my vacation, how many vacation days I have, and what my body can handle.
I get it. I mean, let's don't forget you've got sarcoidosis, and other people who might want to ride with you have sarcoidosis. So you can only do so much. And I talk to some people on the podcast, and they can't walk across their house because they're so laid up or can't catch their breath or whatever. So what we're talking about probably sounds just the side of impossible. So to them. So it's
but they are the reason we do it.
That's right. Exactly. Well, Royce, look, thank you so much for your effort. Thank you, obviously, for joining me and inspiring me to want to get out and do this and raise some money with you and ride bikes and raise awareness for sarcoidosis. I'm really, really pleased with what you're doing. I want to thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you very much for having me on, for spreading the good word, and for rallying. I think I said intrepid before, but I think a pretty intrepid group of people. I go to a couple of support groups, and there's a lot of people that are suffering with sarcoidosis, and they may suffer in silence, they may suffer loudly, but they're trying to find people who care and want to help. And that's what matters the most to me, is the desire to help those that just pay it forward.
Awesome. Great way to look at it. Thank you, Royce.
Yeah, no problem, John. Have a good day.
So thanks to Royce for all the effort, for the fundraising, and for getting the ball rolling. And I've heard from several other people who have an interest in cycling and also are afflicted with sarcoidosis. And I'm just really hoping we can find a way to make this become a thing where a group of us go out and ride bikes and raise a bunch of money for the cause. So Royce, thank you again, and thank you for being a listener and a participant and a fundraiser, and we appreciate all of your efforts. The official Sarc Fighter song is Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards, and Mark is a fellow Sarc Fighter. The story behind the lyrics way back in episode 12. The Sarc Fighter podcast comes out every other Monday. As I am recording today, my trusty dog Dougal is curled up on the chair of my office, where it just makes it better when Dougal's here. And Dougal, as a general rule, makes my life so much better. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11, where I talked with Andrea and Redding Wilson, who started FSR at their kitchen table. Don't forget to follow Sarc Fighter on social media, Facebook, Instagram. I'm even on Peloton as Sarc Fighter if you happen to have a Peloton fitness device. And my cycling blog, Carlin the Cyclist, has a section called Cycling with Sarcoidosis. If you're new here and you just want to know what sarcoidosis is, go listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. My story is episode 1. If you'd like to contact me, send me an email. It's in the show notes, carlinagency@gmail.com. And it helps me reach more people and grow the show if you share it on your social media. And if you like it, just tell one other person. Please subscribe and give the show a nice review wherever you get your downloads. And until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. You learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking, counting down.